So I'm going to take you through how to do an EPQ pilot project. The idea of a pilot project is that it's a good idea to do a small research project before you begin your EPQ fully. Although, if you already know what you're going to do your EPQ about, your small project could become the start of your real thing. But the advantage of doing the pilot project first is that you aren't committed. You can still change your mind and maybe go in a different direction if the pilot project goes well. So it's a win-win really. If the pilot project goes well, we're off, we've started EPQ, and if it doesn't, then fine, you know that wasn't a good topic and you can choose something different. So for these reasons, it's a good idea to do a pilot project as the first step in your EPQ. So I've devised a little pilot project structure here. This is designed to take around about 5 weeks of work and to be around about these lengths. If you're doing a written dissertation, around about 1,200 words, a little bit less if it's going to be an investigation, say 1,000. Performance projects, the emphasis there is on mixing some written research with looking at sources, images from programs and things like that. That will go with it to support a performance. So again, slightly lower word count there, about 800 maybe, and a few slides or sketchbook pages. And similarly for an artifact, fewer words there, but more visual evidence, which could be in the form of Google Slides or sketchbook pages. Overall, I would expect if you're doing about 5 weeks of research, you could end up with around about 12 sources and a report of those lengths. It's worth remembering key points that I've made in my little presentation on choosing a title. If you are going to do a dissertation, you need to answer a question. If you're doing an investigation, there needs to be a hypothesis that you're testing. You need to have an idea of what you're going to try and investigate and frame that as a hypothesis. If you're doing a performance, it's a good idea to imagine that somebody has asked you to perform something for a particular purpose. Maybe they have. Maybe you've been specifically commissioned to do a piece of work for a particular audience. That's a good idea to have that in mind from the start because it will help you to focus your work. And similarly, if you're doing an art project, an artifact, have a practical brief. Think about who you're making something for. What's the purpose behind your project? What practical need is it going to meet? Also worth keeping in mind the acronym FACE, focused, accessible, controversial and engaging, the key points for any good project. Focused, try and be specific, don't try and be too vague in your title. Accessible, keep it simple, don't overcomplicate things. Find something where you can research and begin to understand the topic area for yourself rather than going in at too high a level. Controversial, not necessarily meaning offensively controversial, but more controversial in the sense that there's different ideas or different theories or different possible answers to the question, and you can then explore the strengths of different answers, or if it's a practical project, the strength of different ways of achieving the overall aim. But that's a really important point. There does need to be room for discussion and debate. A project is not simply a description of facts or a list of information. It's got to have some controversy to it. It's got to have an element for argument. And also, pretty obviously, I guess, pick something engaging. Pick something you enjoy. Pick something you're interested in. That way you're likely to do a better project. So when you're picking your title, keep those 4 things in mind. Focused, accessible, controversial and engaging. The FACE acronym for a successful project. So we've got a title, we're going to lay it out on the page. I'm going to talk you through a way of doing this which works if you're on Google Docs. You can adapt this a little bit if you're on Word or another word processor. The first thing is to make sure you use the headings tool. It helps to make your document look smarter and to give it structure. So familiarize yourself with the bar at the top where the headings are and make use of that. I like Rockwell font, I certainly prefer it to Arial, but there are other nice choices of fonts. Have a little look around to choose a smart looking font. Fairly obviously as well, share your document with your teachers so they can keep track of how it's going. So put your title at the top of the page using the title button on the styles bar. And then I would normally reckon that you would have in a pilot project mainly two sections, a shortish introduction and then a review of sources, which we can call the literature review. So I'll put those two on my document using the heading 1 tool to make them the main headings. Then you can write a brief introduction explaining a little bit about the question you've chosen, why you've chosen it, why you think it's an interesting question, why you think it's an important question, and maybe giving some indication of the areas you're going to look at in your project. It doesn't take long to write that, a few hundred words, probably just 150, 200 at most I would think at this stage for the introduction. Structuring the literature review, I think you're almost certainly going to want to include a couple of areas. History of your topic, almost always a good idea to look into the background, find out what's happened, find out what's been said, find out what the main developments are, the main ideas. So I'd have a heading for history and then probably a heading for research evidence. This will be particularly relevant for those projects where there's going to be a controversy or an argument and you need to look at both sides of the argument. You're going to need to sum up evidence on for and against different answers. So one heading will be probably history, another would be research evidence. These can be heading 2s because they're sections within the literature review. And within your research evidence, rather than just gathering everything up, and indeed within the history, you're going to want some further subheadings, heading 3s, which will be for specific topic areas. So you might, for example, have a section where you've researched the ethical issues that are relevant to your question, and you can make that one of the headings. A good tip for finding headings, if you're not sure what areas you need to research, is to have a look at a Wikipedia page. There's almost always a Wikipedia page on most topics, and you will find there they list a table of contents, and normally the contents include fairly obvious things like history or recent developments, controversies, case studies. Having a look at the headings on a Wikipedia page is quite a good idea if you're not sure what headings you should use for structuring your project. If you're doing a performance or an art project, the areas that you're going to need to look at and the headings you should choose will include a bit of background or history to your topic, something on sources of inspiration, so that could be famous artists or performers, maybe reviews of their work. Maybe you can look online at YouTube clips to watch some actual performance work and then commentate on it. You're going to need to research the materials, that could mean the raw materials that you need for your piece of work. It could also mean the ideas that will go into your project, what topic areas you're going to explore as part of your research. You're also going to have to research the techniques and processes that are going to be needed to carry out your project. The key thing when you're doing this research is not just that you gather up information, but that you analyse it, you think about it, you comment on what it means in relation to your project, how it's inspired an idea in you, for example, or what you think of the quality of a particular performance. So whether that's by cutting out source material extracts and then writing in paragraphs beside them in a sketchbook, or whether it's by summarising sources in your own words and then going on to analyse them in a report, one way or another it's important that you actually go beyond just gathering information up, that you begin to think about it and reflect on it and to explain how it's relevant to your project. As I've mentioned, if you're doing an art or performance project, some of your research will be written sources, documentary sources, and some of it will be visual. So I would recommend that you run both a report and either a sketchbook or Google Slides as a way of keeping track of the visual parts of your research. So you've got an idea, you've got a title, you've got a little bit of a plan of structure for your project. You then need to actually find a bunch of sources that you can investigate and use as the basis for your research. Another good tip here is to use Wikipedia, as I'm sure you probably would anyway, but rather than just starting to browse through and taking Wikipedia's information as the starting point, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the Wikipedia page. And what you'll find when you get there, in the case of most Wikipedia pages, is that there's a whole bunch of sources that are often hyperlinked, so you can track back and find the original research that the Wikipedia author used. And in many cases, there's some really good quality sources that you can find that way. So a good way of getting straight into a topic is by going through Wikipedia and tracking back to the original sources. And as I said, they're available if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page and look at the list of references. You could use Google Scholar as well, a terrific tool for taking you into academic art materials. And there are other online open access repositories, places where high quality academic sources can be found and investigated for free. So don't just use easy to access websites, start to look around for some more challenging material and use that as part of the bedrock for your research. And obviously if you're finding sources initially, you're not going to have time to read all of them, so I would create a list of sources, maybe in a separate document or maybe just by pasting web links into my report at some point. Build up a list of sources that you're going to use. When you do actually begin writing up your research, the key technique is paraphrase. And what this means is summing up sources in your own words. And I've emphasised that in your own words. You can't just simply cut and paste and maybe change one or two words. It really does need to be in your own words, both because that's more honest, so you're not accused of plagiarism, and also because it'll be better quality writing. If you just take other people's writing and change it a bit, the net effect is a very confused piece of writing because it doesn't have any stylistic coherence. Much better to read, think for yourself, and sum up what you've learned in your own words. Usually, each source you read will give you probably about one paragraph worth of material. So to start with, if we're going at the rate of one paragraph per source, that's probably about right. As your research develops, you want to start linking sources together and integrating them more, but initially aim for a paragraph per source. When you're taking information from a source, it's always worth thinking, what's the main point here? What have I really learned from this source? And make that the first sentence of your paragraph, the topic sentence in your paragraph. And then support that topic sentence with the evidence that you found. So here's an example that I've made up more or less off the top of my head. Suppose you're doing a project on the use of social media and its impact on teenagers' mental health. You may have read a source which has got some statistics about this. So you read the source and then you think to yourself, what's the main point I learned here? Well, maybe this source has told me that social media use is growing and there is evidence that it's having an impact on mental health. So that's my topic sentence. There is evidence that social media use is growing and it is having an impact on mental health. And then I back that up with the facts from the source. For example, in a study published in 2017, John Smith found that 80% of young people use their phones for more than 1 hour per day, and 70% agree that it has an effect on their mental well-being. So you see how that little paragraph is structured. I've read a source, I've taken a sentence to sum up the main point that I've learnt from that source at the start of the paragraph, and then I've put in some supporting evidence and data. And in essence, that's a nice way to paraphrase your sources.